So, hello, welcome to our episode today. So, this is Healing Collection. Healing Collection's all about learning about different healing practitioners and how you can support yourself in a natural way. And understanding that it's more than just Western medicine to support ourselves and help ourselves. So we love to invite loads of different practitioners in to explore and our knowledge and understand ourselves better. So, Inga, would you like to introduce Joe for us, please?
Yes, it's a pleasure. So, hi, Joe. It's lovely to have you with us here today. So, Joe is a Ayurvedic practitioner. Joe, would you like to explain to us what does that mean exactly? What is a Ayurvedic practitioner?
It's a tricky word to say. It's a Sanskrit word which means the science of life. And it's very much seen as one of the sister sciences to yoga, which people are much more familiar with. And Ayurveda is a very holistic well-being science. It's said to be the oldest um, well-being science in the world. And it very much links physical health with mental health and our senses and spirit. So it is completely integrated and it very much sees humans as part of nature. So to stay well, we need to reconnect with nature and change as the seasons change, the time of the day changes. So it's very individualized. There's no one size fits all. It's very ancient, but very, very relevant to today.
Okay, and so what is the kind of the what are the cornerstones of Ayurvedic practice? So you mentioned that it sees us as part of sort of nature. So how does it then structure the practice or the work?
Yeah, so basically, the earliest written texts are around 5,000 years ago. So, very much pre modern science times, but they do use the language of nature to describe how we can get out of balance and stay in balance. So, it's quite poetic, if you like. There's what's known as 20 gunas or qualities, which are hot, cold, dry, rough, heavy, light. And those are the fundamental words to describe everything in the universe and how it can have an effect on us. And there's a rule in Ayurveda as a sort of unbreakable rule of like increases like. So if you're a hot person in a hot climate eating a hot food like ginger or chilies, you're going to get hotter. So it's very much using that sort of language of the qualities of nature and bringing ourselves back into balance. It becomes individualized through what's known as the doshas as well. So that's in a nutshell, Ayurveda is these elements, which are fire, water, air. I should say them in the right order, sorry. Space or ether, air, fire, water, and earth. So that's from the most subtle. So ether is space or consciousness, the space in the body, all the space in the universe. It gets a bit quantum physicsy. And then air is more imaginable, like a cool breeze blowing. Fire, we can imagine fire and fire in our, all these elements can be represented in our body, and then water and earth. And these elements come together in very different quantities in each of us. And we've all got these five elements because we need space in the body to digest food. Our cells are mainly organelles floating in space and fluid. We need fire. Air is our nervous system and nervous transmission. And fire is metabolism, hormones, enzymes, all of that. Water, we're 70% water, aren't we? And the planet is about 70% water. Newborn babies are a bit more water, older people a bit less. But roughly, it's fascinating to me that there's the same proportion of water in our bodies as there is on the planet, because it's building on this idea of microcosm and macrocosm. Human beings are a tiny microcosm of everything represented in the universe. And I read somewhere that we've got enough iron in our body to make a few nails, and everything in the universe we can find in our bodies. And then lastly, earth is muscles, tendons, ligaments, bones. We all need that earth element. But some people are more airy, some people are more fiery, and some people are more earthy. So
How
yeah.
do you tell the difference when people are more airy, earthy, or fiery?
So in India, some doctors still just treat using the five elements. A patient will come and they'll say, you've got too much air, you've got too much bloating, you've got too much swelling or edema, there's too much water, rashes, heat, inflammation, anger, that's fire, etc. But at some point, someone decided to say, if someone's got more air ether, you're known as a Vata person. And you'll recognize this in friends and family, perhaps yourself. These people are sort of like willow trees. They're either quite tall or quite short. They're very light boned. They've got much more cold, dry, rough, airy qualities. So their minds are quite quick. They talk quickly, they move quickly. Their skin is colder. They feel the cold and they suffer from dryness. And that might be dry skin, or it might be GI tract dryness through constipation. There's not enough fluid in the bowel. So these are very much airy people. And it's not all bad. There's a lot of sensitivity, creativity, energy, enthusiasm. There's lots positive about each of these doshas, but that's more of an airy person. A pitta person is more dominant in fire and water. They're much more muscly, much more determined, more prone to feeling too warm. They're quite bright people. They're good orators. They're very organized. They might get hangry. They've got really good digestive fire. So their life's great organizers. And then kapha people look very different. If you think about the vata might be like a willow, a wispy willow, and a pitta person is like a muscly beech tree. Our kapha predominant individuals who are more water and earth, they're more the oak trees. They're very loyal and grounded. They're just a bit heavier. Their bones are heavier. They're much more grounded. They're the complete opposite of vata. So they might say 5 words for vata's 30 words, for example. So each person needs very different diet, lifestyle, and herbs to stay happy and balanced.
And everyone's different, I suppose. So there are elements of what they need. So what suits one person is not going to suit another person as well. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a real guidance in Ayurveda. There's something is right for everybody, but nothing is right for everybody. So there's this idea of there's no personalized, there's no one size fits all really. So if we look at even meals, what we should be, how many meals a day, that can be personalized, and what sort of food. So vata types, there's something in Ayurveda called the cupped hands rule. So if you hold up your hands, that's about how big your stomach is, and that needs to be half food, quarter air, and quarter water. So vata people tend to sometimes have quite small hands. So for them, they might be better off on 4 smaller meals a day, spaced 4 hours apart, honoring their hunger. That's really important. But kapha types, maybe with really big hands, they might do really well at a meal around 10 or 11 when they're hungry, and then again at 6. So they might be fine on 2 quite substantial meals a day, which is very much, picked up in modern fasting trends and intermittent fasting and all the different ways that you can fast today. Ayurveda really had all of this covered. Pitta people they've got quite strong hunger, as I mentioned, so they're probably best on 3 square meals a day. But then it comes down to what we eat as well. It is basically warm cooked food is best for most, and I know you're quite interested in the raw food movement. But vata people need more grounding food, more oily food. Pitta people need more cooling and calming food, definitely less spice for them. And kapha need dry, rough food, so quinoa and barley, just to keep things stimulated and moving. They need much less oil in their diet than a vata person. So you can see how easily people can go astray if they're reading that everyone needs to eat breakfast. It's just not true. Or everyone needs to drink 2 liters of water a day. That isn't, there's no science backing these up. They're all pushed by the food industry.
Do you think that children naturally followed their way? Because some children are hungry more than others. Do you feel that they naturally follow their instincts in that way than adults would do when they get older?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think we just have to step back and see how prevalent the snacking food culture industry is now. That just wasn't around when I was a kid, certainly.
Yeah.
And kids didn't have water bottles at school even, I think it's really hard to step back from that, because the food industry is very clever at making snacks that are really, tempting for kids. And I think my gut feeling is most kids are best off just having 3-4 square meals a day and no snacks in between, because then that really impacts on their real hunger for a savory meal if they're having a few breadsticks or a sachet or a smoothie or something. So it's such a hard one to filter out, but definitely that guidance. Vata child, if you've got a Vata child who just burns through energy quickly, always on the go, they well might need 4 smaller meals a day or a substantial snack at some point. Whereas a Kapha child, I wouldn't be giving snacks to, because that could really cause excess mucus in childhood, too much sugary foods. And I get so many clients who come to see me in my Somerset clinic who I say, how often do you get rumbly tummy hunger? And they say never. And I say, well, can you remember when you last had that? And I say, well, maybe when I was a teenager. And really, we all need to reawaken that rumbly tummy hunger. And a lot of people are afraid to let that happen, because it can be unpleasant for some people, but actually that means our gut is ready to receive food,
Oh, that's
waiting for rumbly tummy.
interesting.
Makes sense,
And
actually. I remember
the other
always.
thing that I found really fascinating was I just did an online dosha thing a couple of years ago. And what I found fascinating about it was that all the foods that were suggested for me were foods that I absolutely love. And all the foods that weren't suggested for me, that in fact I should avoid, bar I think about one, which was sultanas, which I really love, but apparently are not great. I don't like. And it made so much sense to me. And I was so excited. I was like, finally, I could just I can eat all this food, and it's really supposed to be, best for me. So do you find that with your clients? Do you find that it's less of a struggle getting them to eat the food because their body is adapted naturally to eat that food anyway?
Yeah, it's a big question there. Just going back to you, did you come out more Vata body mind
Yeah,
type?
yeah. Vata
Your
with
hair is
some
very Vata. Vata people
my
often have really
hair.
curly hair.
That's so
And
funny.
Andy Warhol's a real Vata type. So I'm curious why sultanas came out, and I suspect maybe if you soaked them, it would be fine, because dry fruit is a bit too dry for Vata. They don't have a lot of fire and moisture to digest it. But if you soak the dried fruit, that makes it much more digestible. So,
Can
Okay,
you
and that's
tell
really
by
interesting.
looking at someone what they are?
um, I'd like to see all your bodies, but definitely just from how people talk and even seeing your head, you can get quite a good
Have you
idea.
got an idea what I am then?
Have you done a dosha questionnaire or a quiz?
No.
Your voice is much more kapha. It's sort of just a lower, slower voice. Um, I can't really
Tell
see.
on the
I don't
Zoom.
really. Yeah, I mean, traditionally the pulse was taken in India to tell the dosha. That's less common today, and there's some really great online dosha questionnaires. And then once people start to read, they realize actually that's not who they are, that's their out of balance state, because our dosha is confirmed when the sperm meets the egg. So unfortunately, we can even be born unbalanced if mum has a particularly stressful pregnancy or lives in a very hot country that she's not used to. So we can be born a little bit out of balance. So sometimes
That's
I describe it
interesting.
like peeling off layers of the onion. So people fill in a questionnaire, they're like, I'm Pitta or Vata, maybe. People never really come out high kapha when they're not. And actually they realize that they're really stressed or really hot and bothered, and their true nature, they need to peel off a layer of the onion.
Yeah, exactly,
Really interesting.
because I nearly died in my mum, so, and I was a premature child, so that's quite interesting. So that's stress,
Yeah.
isn't it?
But
Yeah.
going back, Inga, you asked a really interesting question, because I've thought a lot hard about this, because actually when we're all a little bit out of balance. I don't want to depress your listeners, but modern life is pretty hard to stay balanced today. Our senses are bombarded, our lifestyle isn't that tuned into our natural circadian rhythms anymore. The food industry is playing havoc with what we're eating unless we're really conscious about it. So we are all a little bit out of balance. And the gut brain connection really got me thinking, because I've noticed that airy people who are too airy crave a lot of crunchy raw food, and they love to go jogging and running. And those two things are making them more out of balance. Pitta people with too much fire love spicy food and alcohol and red meat, and they push themselves. They love saunas. They do lots of heating things. And Kapha people love cheese, wheat, potatoes, siestas, hammock, and I'm like, why are we craving things that aren't good for us? Why aren't we bringing ourselves back into balance? And I think it's because people haven't got time to meditate. So they're not really tuning into our bodies have an innate wisdom, and we know exactly what to do. But I think there's also what's called armor in most people's digestive system. So armor is anything that the body should have got rid of, but it hasn't. And it could be emotional. It could be from an argument, unprocessed emotions, or it could be a deep fried pizza that came from the freezer originally that we ate a week ago that our digestion's still trying to process. And armor is seen as the cause of 80% of diseases in Ayurveda, and it can coat each cell. So the cells don't recognize each other, causing autoimmunity, or it can lodge in the joints and cause arthritis. But when we get out armor, the early stages is in the gut, which is why Ayurveda says most problems start in the gut, which blew my mind because I studied 20 years ago before the microbiome, gut brain had all come out. But if we've got this armor in our gut, the point I want to make is I think our signals from our gut brain to our brain up here get confused, because it blew my mind to discover there's 8 times as many nervous signal messages that go from our enteric gut brain up here. One message comes from our brain to our gut for every 8 messages coming from our gut to our brain.
Wow.
So it really shifts where the mothership is in the body.
Yeah.
And if we've got this sticky, smelly armor, it's going to cause confusion to what's going on. So I think that's why when people come back into balance, they're like, I really don't want to eat spicy food anymore. I've really gone off raw food. You know, I don't want to eat cake and sweet foods anymore, maybe as the odd treat. So I think once people shift back into balance, they do, their body's wisdom takes over.
That's
I
really
don't think
fascinating.
supermarket. When you said that people get really confused, and I think I was in a supermarket yesterday with my daughter. I'm just finding supermarkets now just too overwhelming because it's really hard to find healthy foods. And the amount of, I was just like, oh my God, there's more unhealthy food on these shelves than there is healthy. And all these new protein shakes and stuff that are coming up, which, there's too many of them. And I'm like, that can't be healthy because they're all repackaged and da da da. And I was just like, my daughter kept reaching out for stuff. And I was like, no, you can't have that. No, you can't have that. No, you can't have that. Which is not nice to keep saying no, isn't it? Because you want to be able to have a lovely experience in the
Yeah.
supermarket with your daughter and go, yeah, of course you can try that. Instead of saying no, you can't try that because that's bad for you. That's so it's the signals that I just felt. I got into the car and I was quite stressed because I felt that I was being one of those no mums instead of like saying, so you can't have that because that's not healthy, that's not healthy, that's not healthy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just felt really stressed about it. And I was like, oh, I don't like doing
It's
this.
so interesting, Joni, because I lived in Italy for 13 and a half years, and a
Hmm.
lot of Italians, certainly the old generation, they don't use supermarkets, or very rarely they go
Hmm.
to the market. And the Italian markets are just heaven. So you go
Yeah.
with your children and you've got all your fresh produce. You've got your tomatoes, your courgettes, your peaches, your apricots. You've got your bags of olives, and my children used to go with their nonna, with their granny, and they'd come back and they'd just be stuffing their faces with olives, with freshly cut meats, with maybe freshly prepared chicken, with bread that had just been baked that morning, with vegetables. It was just, so there was none of this stuff because it just wasn't anything prepackaged.
That's
Even the
how I
meat,
grew up. So,
they were
yeah, I grew up.
slicing them there in
Yeah.
front of you. So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
how I actually grew up actually in the markets in Portugal. So yeah,
yeah,
no, I totally get that. Just that in
yeah.
the UK, it's just so
Yeah, it's interesting you've mentioned Portugal and Italy because the Soil Association did a study a while ago. I used to work for Pucker Herbs and we did a lot of advocacy about
okay, yeah.
getting herbs and spices on the Eat Well guidance, because actually using more herbs and spices, which they do in both of those countries, is a
Mm.
really cheap, affordable to make meals healthier. But they showed that basically our shopping trolleys have the highest amount of ultra processed food in Europe. It's well over half. Whereas Portugal, which is much poorer GDP wise, it was 10%. And I think Italy was around there. And it just shows that they've got, they're not as wealthy, but they haven't lost their food culture. They actually are still cooking food from scratch. And we unfortunately haven't. And we run Ayurveda courses and we don't want to make people feel guilty. So Kate, my partner, and I, we always talk about 80-20. 80% Ayurveda, 20% go with the flow, let your kids have what they want, because you don't want to develop, food anxiety and
Yeah.
orthorexia, and 80-20 is a pretty good balance. but we really need to shift that back from the UK, because I think at the moment we have been really led along a merry path by our food industry.
100%.
And if people wanted to sort of make, Ayurvedic food, how would they do that? Is there sort of like a special preparation for it, or how would one go about doing that?
So it definitely doesn't need to be Indian. Lots of people come and they're like, oh, I really want to eat Ayurvedically, but I don't like Indian food. And we're like, don't worry, you can eat Greek or Turkish or Italian. Or I often think about English food and I'm like, I don't know what English food is. Is it meat and two veg? I think, again, we don't even really know what our food is anymore. But Ayurveda is guided by the six tastes. And that's how any meal from anywhere in the world can be made Ayurvedic, through balancing what's called the six tastes. And they're sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent. And essentially, at the moment, we're getting too much sweet, sour, and salty, because they're the easy tastes. Think about sweet and sour takeaway, or, tomatoes are sour and pasta's sweet. So unfortunately, most of Australia, America, and the UK, I think 80% of their calories comes from pizza, pasta, variation or combo, doesn't it really? There's a lot of wheat and there's a lot of cheese and there's a lot of tomato. Pungent comes from the spices, and bitter from green leafy vegetables and herbs. Even coffee's got bitter. And astringent is legumes and lentils and things like that. So you can look at any meal and say, well, basically, a bad example of a balanced meal is a plate of tomato with pasta sauce. So that's mainly sweet and sour. But if you squeezed, some oregano there, some sage, got some rocket there, we get a bit of bitter there. It doesn't take much to kind of put some olives in. That's a lovely way to get the bitter. But when you do go to a lovely Indian restaurant, you get like a tiffin or a thali or something, all the six tastes will be there in the right balance. And we do need sweet. It's the most important spiritual taste. It provides contentment. And I see people who come who aren't eating enough sweet, and their outlook to life is a bit sour. So we need the sweet taste. Don't want to demonize that, but it's rice and whole grains and sweet potatoes and beetroot and carrots. It's not refined sugar. It's a bit of maple syrup or honey as a treat, but it's not refined sweet. But it's the complex carbohydrates.
It's really, yeah.
That is really
That
interesting.
makes complete. So you said you see a lot of women that are going through menopause. And that's because when they get to this stage of life, they start to think about what they're eating and how it affects their hormones, and they're starting to sort of wake up a little bit and see how they can help themselves, and they're not getting help from the doctor, so they come and see you. Is that how it goes?
I do see quite a lot of women. I just turned 50 myself, so it's a really subject close to my heart. And diet can be hugely helpful around menopause. I never see diet alone. I always see the sort of triangle of diet, herbs, lifestyle. I think that's what, for any imbalance, that's what people need. Just taking herbs isn't enough. Just tweaking the diet probably isn't enough, but it can be. So Ayurveda says food is medicine. And if the diet is wrong, medicine's of no use. And if the diet is right, medicine is of no need. So actually, tweaking the diet in the early stages can really help. We haven't talked about this yet, but Ayurveda sees the life phases are dominated by different doshas. So childhood is a kapha time. Kids are growing and they can be a bit snotty, and they're just in that growth stage of life, which is kapha. We're pitta is adults ticking over. We're not growing, we're not shrinking. But vata takes over from the age of 55. So whatever your dominant dosha, it becomes a vata time of life. So for most women, starting to shift to a vata balancing diet once they hit 55 can be really helpful. So more cooked, grounding, nourishing foods. It's really important to get healthy fats at this time to support hormone health. And knowing your dosha can really help manage your symptoms, because I think I saw a list of 130 symptoms now being attributed to menopause, and that's probably the tip of the iceberg, really. Estrogen affects so many cells in the body, and it affects each woman differently. But the more balanced a woman is coming into her menopause, the easier time she's going to have. So if anyone's listening in their mid-30s, 40s, it really start to look which dosha's out of balance, because it will really help if you come into menopause more balanced. And also knowing your dosha will warn you what symptoms you're likely to get.
Oh, that's interesting. So just very quickly, what symptoms might the three doshas expect to experience?
So it all comes back to the gunas, or the qualities. So vata was cold, dry, light, rough, airy, subtle, mobile, clear. They're going to get things like dryness, maybe vaginal dryness or constipation. They're going to get much more anxiety and insomnia, those sorts of things. Pitta, more predominant in fire and water and sharpness and heat. They're going to be more prone to hot flushes, whereas vata might get hot or cold flushing. It doesn't really get talked about, but some people get these waves of cold.
Yeah, I've heard of that actually. I know quite a few people that have talked about, well, people have emailed me about having cold flushes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a thing. It's a huge thing. It's quite a thing.
Yeah, so if you're too fiery, you might also get heavier bleeding in that perimenopause period. You might get skin issues, there's too much heat in the blood, those kinds of things. But irritability, that real anger and rage that so many women have, that's all linked with pitta. And then kapha, if there's too much water, earth, there's too much heaviness, there's too much water, there's too much down energy. That could be swelling in the body, it could be depression, it could be inertia, lethargy, that real sort of, lack of spark around this time is too much kapha out of balance when a woman comes into menopause.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating.
So it's a
So
huge
that's
subject,
something,
really.
yeah, it's something that Joni's, because you have the tea company, so Joni's obviously with
Yeah,
that
I've got Wild Women
double.
Tea, which is tea for women's hormones. And then I've got my pause support podcast as well, which is my menopause podcast, which I do with Vicky, which I need to get you on, Joe.
Yeah, let's talk menopause.
Yeah, like proper session on that. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's huge, and it's just I just think that the more I think a lot of women don't really take that stage seriously enough, or they do too late, going too late into it. They're too scared to admit that that's part of what's going on, because it's so much information out there now, which is great, which is a positive thing. But also now I think there's so much information that they're just getting lost
Yeah,
on
you
the
just
route
switch
as
off
well.
actually. Yeah, because it's just too. It's like anything when it becomes too much. I think most people just go, okay, like la 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 la, and then ignore it. So it's really good to have actually people who are experts in in their field around this, because I do feel like everybody is now a menopause expert. And so I think it's really important to have people who are experts, who are able to sort of make, and especially lifestyle changes. I think that's really great, around food, for example. And as you say, Joe, prepping for it in your 30s and 40s as well, rather than waiting till the last minute. I think that's really important, because also it's just, we all want to live as long as possible. So we want to have our bodies and our minds in the best possible state as we start to get older. So it's a kind of a win-win, really, isn't it? To start considering our diet and maybe taking up yoga. I mean, is yoga good for the menopause, do you think?
Yoga's really helpful. And I think just one more thing to add is switching from that pitta phase of life is all about career, family, householder responsibilities and things like that. And traditionally in India, a woman would then shift from the age of 55 into a different phase of life where she could step back from those day-to-day responsibilities and become much more the wise elder. And we've lost that, really. I think women are parenting up, they're parenting down, they're often at peak career and around their 45, 50 years. So yoga's brilliant because they're resting, essentially. Unless they're doing hardcore yoga, there's going to be shavasana and some pranayama there and meditation, hopefully. So I think if women, one thing women could do is just find more time to rest. And Alexandra Pope, founder of the Red School, she talks a lot about micro rests, just 5-10 minute windows. It's not like a 90-minute yoga nidra for most women. It's 10 minutes of just being able to have a little bit of time out and look out of the window is what I find I'm doing. I never looked out of the window, and now all I want to do is find some time to look out of the window. But this idea of women, it's okay to be pulling away at this phase of life and be a little bit less interested in your career, your partner, maybe even a little bit less interested in your children. I had a child when I was 43, so I was sort of in that interesting phase of entering menopause with quite a young child still, which nature definitely didn't intend. But it's okay for women to cocoon and pull away a little bit so that they can have this resurgence. You know, Japan, they call it the second spring. It's like a second puberty. If you think about, I've got
That's how I
teenage
see it.
I've got teenage daughters at the moment. I can see what's happening in their bodies, and it's happening in mine, but in the opposite way.
100%.
And rest, it will help everybody. There is no women in her late 40s who won't be benefited by finding some time for rest, whichever way. Women are very resourceful. Often it involves some delegation, stepping back from perfectionism, things being just good enough, no one else noticing. But you've stepped back a bit, but that's okay.
Well, it's quite interesting. You mentioned you've got two daughters that are going through their teenagers. So have you changed their diets a little bit as they are when they're having their periods? Do you change what you feed them because you have the knowledge so you can actually bring it into your home, or do you how do you go about that stage of it? Because I was thinking about
Actually, the
Lily.
diet when they're on their bleed, you mean?
Yeah. Do you like suddenly change what you cook that week to help the situation?
That's a really interesting one, and things aren't that regular enough that I know what's going on. But I've got a general guidance. You know what teenagers are like; they need to
Yeah.
rebel. So Ayurveda says don't eat yogurt at night because it's too heavy, mucousy forming food. Have it at lunchtime. And my kids just look at me, go and get yogurt and granola at like 9, 10 at night.
Just to
Someone
annoy
said
you.
the other day, if your kids are rebelling by eating yogurt at night, then you're fine. My
Then
kids
you're
are fine.
okay.
Ways to
Then you're
rebel.
nailing
So
it.
we're at that stage of, I don't want to force it down their throats. My 15-year-old did have the grace a year or two ago. She said, "Mom, my skin is really much better than my friends. I've noticed. I think because you don't buy the junk feed and I'm not eating so much sugar." Because she is quite surprised when she goes on holiday with people and literally everything's in a wrapper, and the amount of snacks and sugar and ultra processed foods have fats which aren't great for teenage girls. And some of them have got such heavy periods, they're already on the pill, it's affecting their sports. So I think there's a general appreciation that they have pretty good skin for teenagers, and their periods should be easy. This is not really talked about because so many women have a really horrendous time with periods. But
Yeah, mine were
that isn't
horrific.
that's the canary in the gold mine. If periods are hard, then the body is out of balance. So this is a bit of, for teenage girls, so many of them have really heavy bleeding now, things like this. So there's an appreciation, but there's also a healthy rebellion, which I fully expect from them, that Ayurveda is my way. And, but my
I think,
7-year-old is much more within my powers still. So
yeah.
yes, they eat pretty well. And, a big thing with Ayurveda is not to eat fruit after a meal, because it ferments and sits around and can cause bloating. So, but fruit before a meal is fine. So they definitely know about that one, although the teenagers love to rebel on that one as well. So,
And I think you've touched on a really important subject as well, which is, that your period is I learned this quite late in life, but it was perhaps one of the most important things I learned as a woman is that my period is a great indicator of how my body is and how the last month has been for me. And when I realized that, I would really check in on how my period appeared, when it appeared, whether there was any spotting before or after, it just any changes, clots, how long it lasted. Just I became so aware of my period, and I've taught my daughters to be like that as well. And for me,
yeah,
it was hugely important because, if I had to say, for example, I remember in some of the most stressful times in my life, I would flood, and I was able to look at that and go, oh, okay, I'm in a mess here. I really need to sort myself out, and so I really gauge a lot by my period. It's a really helpful indicator for me to say, okay, how am I doing this month? And then if I'm not doing well, to sort of start thinking about, maybe being more relaxed or doing more exercise, whatever it is that feels that feels right. So I think that's a really useful thing to say as well. So I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you, we've talked a lot about sort of the physical body. How can Ayurveda, or is Ayurveda able to help with the mind? Because I know you have a diploma in psychology. Can Ayurveda be useful for, say, depression, anxiety, things which are more related perhaps to the mind?
Yeah, so I'm training to be a counselor, an integrative counselor at the moment, to just really be able to cover that emotional angle well. It definitely was practiced in ancient India, but it's not taught so well on modern Ayurveda courses, some of the more spiritual side, using mantra and things like this. I think the really fascinating thing about Ayurveda is it sees the root of the mind channel is in the heart. So what we're feeling here is the root to the mind, and then these channels flow out all over the body so that each cell has consciousness. The only two tissues in the body that don't have consciousness are our nails and our hair. So they're lacking in consciousness. But our liver cells, our ankle bone, whichever bit of the body you want, there is consciousness there. So that's where they were 5,000 years ago. And now the contemporary view is catching up with wonderful books like The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, Gabor Mate's writing, and all the research showing like ACEs, adverse childhood events, are being held in the body of adults, causing things like autoimmune, and that the emotions need to be processed. So Ayurveda very much has this by being able to strengthen the nervous tissue and support with behavioral changes and lifestyle and things like that. And I spend 90 minutes with my clients, which is a real privilege. So it would be very unusual for emotions not to come up. We talk about bowel movement and sleep and digestion, but then the emotions have to come up. They always do come up. And I support people at the moment, but I very much want to have counselling as well. So I can offer Ayurvedic counselling. But I find that most people are so empowered by learning what dosha they are. They have what we call aha moments in the clinic and on the course, because they realize once they know that they're Vata nature, they know what their strengths are, which is enthusiasm and optimism and just giving and creativity. They're having all these ideas, but they also know their weaknesses, which is burnout. They're not very good at holding on to money or energy or people sometimes. So they need to just ground. Yeah. And it's so empowering. I nearly studied Chinese medicine 20 years ago, or more than that now. And I loved acupuncture, and it really helped me when I was burning out in my early 20s. But I didn't get that sense of how I could fix myself. I was going to see the Chinese lady every week, and she was giving me needles, and she was the one who first told me about snacking, because I thought it was healthy to eat like a hunter-gatherer and graze all day long. I was doing all the wrong things. But I suddenly came to Ayurveda, and I knew what doshas were balance, and I needed know how to bring those doshas back into balance. So it shifted the power from the doctor to the me to sort myself out, because really no one else can fix you out. You can be guided and supported, but ultimately the buck stops with you. Yeah.
Sorry, Danny's barking away. I apologise. Danny? Shh.
He's having a pitta moment. So you can do
Yeah.
doshas in dogs as well. You can look at dog breeds.
Dogs.
Yeah, so a real Vata dog breed would be Whippets and Greyhounds, very kind of large or small and really shaking a bit and feeling the cold. And terriers are a classic Pitta, very territorial and a bit noisy. And then you get Labradors and the dogs that are just full of love, Spaniels, and just kind of like, but Labrador's a real Kapha breed of dog, just like a little bit greedy, liking the treats and full of love.
No.
So it's just nourishing your element, really, isn't it? And nourishing who you are and learning to understand yourself better, isn't it, as well, through it all. And then that using food as well and learning all of it coming together. So it's a round circle.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about treatments, but Ayurveda also has wonderful treatments which come under the lifestyle banner. So self-massage after diet, self-massage is one of the cornerstones of staying well through Ayurveda. So just applying warm oil to our skin a few times a week before a bath or shower. And then there's a huge toolbox of hands-on treatments. There's Shirodara, where oil is poured onto the third eye, which is a beautiful treatment. It's like therapy without talking. And then I offer a treatment called Heart Dara, where a reservoir of herbal decoction and warm oil is held over the heart for half an hour. And again, that just, people quite often have waves of emotion being released without a word being said by anyone.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It's
One
amazing.
question, do you see a lot of men?
No.
I wonder why that is.
No, I had one man on my foraging workshop yesterday and 13 women, and then I'd say maybe 5% of my clients are men. I'm starting to be counseling, that's mainly women. Women are just drawn to this work now. It's really interesting. I think women are more connected to the environment and nature, maybe realizing this is the work that needs to be done now. Men maybe aren't so open to going there. It's a bit of a mystery, really, why, because things are really changing, but I'm not seeing that many men. And my friends, colleagues, similar, men tend to get bought by their wives as well. How about you? Do you see a lot of men?
No,
No.
no, not really, actually. No, I had a few hypnotherapy men,
Yeah.
like want to give up smoking, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. But otherwise,
I
no,
think
all
it's
my clients are
predominantly female,
female.
isn't it? The whole industry is
Mm.
predominantly female. I've seen, I think, how many male clients have I had? Four, maybe, in all the years I've been working. It's, yeah, they don't tend to, I don't know why, it's interesting, but definitely there's definitely a movement of women. I think maybe we're just feeling more empowered, and therefore we're searching for more
Yeah.
empowerment through.
I remember I had a policeman in Bristol who had terrible gout, and he just did such big work. And
Oh,
I
that's
think men tend to
amazing.
come when there's a very specific problem that they can't ignore anymore. I
Mm,
had a postman who also had very specific problems, and working with night shift workers is really challenging, actually, because
mm,
they have so much taken out of their control and they are going so against their circadian rhythm. And the research is really quite dramatic about how night shift workers suffer more health wise. But there are things you can do. Like, he was having his biggest meal at 2, 3 a.m. So I said, let's shift things. So you're having your biggest meal at 7 a.m. or at like 9 p.m. So at least you're eating more within that window and not having the yogurt at all, because it was the time when, yogurt is very heavy to digest. So there were tweaks. But I think it's men come when there's a health problem they can't ignore anymore. But maybe, yeah, they're obviously going to the doctors more than they are going to integrative practitioners. So
well, I think that's because of the historically, when there was a shift from, say, the female practitioners, who were the herbalists, and the forgotten the word for it, but the women who helped other women give birth, and
yeah,
I think when there was a changeover in about the sort of 1500s, and the science came in, it was very much to do, it was men. There were no women involved in it. So I think
yeah,
that's probably why men want that, because that's where they feel comfortable, whereas women probably naturally feel perhaps more comfortable with things that are less scientific, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I love science. I find I kind of need to have science behind things, but that's maybe
yeah.
maybe women on the whole don't. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Ayurveda is very scientific. It's called the science of life, and there's so much
okay.
research now. But yeah, I think you're right, Inga. We burnt all our herbalists and midwives over 400
Mm,
years as well, which definitely didn't help. And that's why I'm
yeah.
so passionate about teaching foraging as well, so people could eat something wild every day. And we need to learn how to use dandelion and nettle. I love the Ayurvedic herbs
Yeah.
from the Himalayas, but we've got these wonderful medicines on our doorsteps, and it's so empowering to know that after the winter we need more bitter cleansing taste, which nettle, wild garlic, cleavers, and dandelion provides, and they're just growing everywhere for free. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to make wild garlic pesto later. And one of my favorite things, and it's an Italian recipe, is nettle risotto. And my
Oh
girls go
yeah.
crazy when I make that. It's just so good. And you're completely right. When I'm picking the nettles and then when I'm putting them in, there's a real sense of excitement there. There's a real sense of being empowered on some level that you just don't get going to the supermarket.
And there are these superfoods in Ayurveda. So nettle has four of six of the Ayurvedic tastes. I can't quite remember which two it lacks, but there are these superfoods. Garlic has five. So one could presume that wild garlic also has five. So you know that your nettle risotto with a bit of sweetness from the rice is going to be pretty much all there, the six tastes. So yeah, nettle, probably everyone in the UK, if they just learned how to use nettles, they save money. And we'd all be a lot healthier for just eating a little bit of that food every day. Yeah, it's not complicated. It's education is so key here.
Just been lost, isn't it? It really has. It's like completely lost. Really, and just yeah. I think it's because everyone's lives are so fast and busy, and they just don't know how to slow down, do they? To think about maybe when they're taking the dog for a walk, they can pick up some garlic on their way because it's everywhere at the
Mhm.
moment.
Yeah, it's
I
Yeah.
live
everywhere,
in
isn't
London,
it?
so
Yeah.
it's just everywhere. It's that
But you're
whole
right,
thing.
it is lost. And in Italy it's not lost. Like the last time I was
Mm.
back in Italy, I was chatting to my I call him my uncle because part of the family, and he was saying to me, he was saying, "Oh, Inga, I'm going out and I'm going to get this and I'm going to get that," and he knew everything about. They go for the mushrooms, they go for the chestnuts. It's like a whole thing. The family goes out,
Yeah,
but
wonderful.
the chicory as well. My mother-in-law was always cutting. Whenever she came over
Yeah,
to our
bitter.
house, because
That's really good bitter taste. Bitter
yeah, and
taste
she
is
used
the
to
one
say to
we're most
me,
yeah, we're most lacking here. And I often wonder if that's why people crave coffee, because that's a readily available bitter. It's got
okay,
downsides, big downsides.
yeah,
But the bitter is probably saving, coffee is probably saving most people because it does at
okay.
least provide that.
Yeah, because what she used to do was she used to boil the chicory, just wash it, then she'd boil it. And then she'd make me drink it because she was my mother-in-law. I'd have to do it. And she used to say to me, it cleanses your blood. And
Yeah.
she had left school at 8 years old, I think. She couldn't read, she couldn't write, she couldn't drive a car,
Yeah.
but she had a
Yeah. Yeah.
knowledge of the properties of food that were like a herbalist. It was extraordinary. It was really, really amazing.
Yeah.
Really amazing. So,
Wonderful.
so Joe, could you give us, for example, 5 tips to take away for someone watching who says, wow, I'm really interested in Ayurveda? 5 things that they could maybe do to begin their journey.
Yeah, sure. I think we've covered so the key ones. I guess the first one would be explore what your dosha is, because it's such a powerful tool to know what diet is right for you, what lifestyle, what treatments, even where you might be better off going on holiday. And if you're single, even better off looking at what sort of partner might help balance you. I knew I needed more kapha in my partner. And there's a great book called What's Your Dosha Baby by Lisa Coffey, which it
Oh.
sounds quite dumbed down, but it isn't at all. It goes through Vata man, Vata woman, even Vata man, like same sex, and what the different doshas look like in a relationship. You can imagine there's two pitta people together, they both want to have the last word and be right, which is okay if you both know your nature and you can have a giggle about it. But if you don't, you could clash with fire. So know your dosha, explore it. We've got a little quiz on our website that maybe you can share the link for, or go and see a practitioner or read a book. There's some really great books out there. I can recommend a very good one, Teach Yourself Ayurveda. And once you know your dosha, so that's one tip, and then connect with your circadian rhythm. Just try and get up with the sun and go to bed a couple of hours after sunset.
So
Next,
in the family, like
yeah,
say if all of you are different and you're cooking for your family and you're like,
yeah,
right, we're all different doshas, how do you cope then food wise? Do you do a little bit of each
yeah.
or
This always comes up on our course.
sorry, I was
People
just
are like,
like
oh my goodness, we've all done it. And my husband's pitta and I'm vata. And this is very well coped with traditional Indian cooking, where you'd have like a main rice dish or a main vegetable dish
mm,
or a main, and then you have like chutneys or you have extra chancing. So you
ah,
pour a little bit of extra ghee on
yeah.
your vata family members, maybe give them a little bit, the pitta people might have a bit of coriander and coconut chutney to just cool the spices a little bit, and the Kapha people would not have the extra ghee. They might have, you know, a bit more of the spices and things like that. So it does help just having a few different dishes and some fresh chutneys. That's really helpful. But yeah, it's sometimes a little bit, you know, just give them extra carbohydrates, you know, they need a bit more of the bitter taste. They need some more. Pitta and Kapha people benefit from a lot more dark green leafy veg. Give them all that bitter fiber and roughage. Vata people definitely know raw. Pitta people could get away with a little bit of raw, maybe, but Ayurveda sees most people are evolved to eat warm cooked food, and most all traditional
Do you
cultures around the
do,
world eat
do,
cooked food.
do you disagree with the raw food trend that's going on then? Do you think that's quite unhealthy?
Yes, it's such. There's no good or bad in Ayurveda. It's just what's right for the person, the time, the place, and the raw food movement, as far as I understand, originated in Arizona, which is very hot and arid. And raw food would really help dampen mucous membranes and bring moisture. I live in a cold, damp climate, as I think you both do as well. So the last thing we need is more sort of cold dampness. We need warm, cooked food. So it's really what is right for the geography and the person. A lady came to see me. She was on juices and raw food, and she was so cold and constipated. And
Gosh.
it was such a short consultation because I said, you know what, just go away and have soups for a week. And she was like, I'm comfortable with that. And I said, you just got to try it. It's not, you know, just experience it and come back in a week. And she came back and she'd started going to the toilet. Her hands had warmed up and she was so amazed. And it seems so simple, but it's really, the raw food movement is very powerful. And yes, you may get more plant enzymes by eating raw food because they haven't been destroyed and blah, blah, blah. But is your body able to access the nutrition in the food? Not really, because our guts have evolved to eat. Humans started using fire such a long time ago. So it's a playoff there. But if you are going to eat raw food, eat it in the summer when it's in season. Have it with an oily dressing. I mean, I grow my own rocket, rucola, you know, it's delicious. And eat raw food with a bit of pungency, like radicchio or chicory or rocket. So it's Ayurveda never says never. They're just like, oh, it depends.
Well, what do you think of vegan then? Like, do you know what I mean? Just because that's you know, a lot of people are vegan and they're going. It's a trend, isn't it? So I always. So what do
Yes,
you
we've
feel
got
about that
wonderfully
as
distracted
well?
from my tips, but this is a big,
Sorry,
you
I'll
know,
go back to your tips.
this question comes up a lot. I this is my personal belief, and it might upset some of your listeners, and I just have to be true to my beliefs. I think you can be vegetarian very, very easy, but you do need to have lentils and pulses. You can't be sort of just having cheese and wheat and potatoes, and tomatoes. Veganism, I think, is a very specific diet, and I think if you're doing a lot of spiritual practices, maybe a lot of pranayama and things like that. But even the yogis in the Himalayas, they had just milk and fruit. You know, that's what they were living on. Um, I think I'm happier people vegan when they're adult bodies, their bones have grown, than teenage vegans. I think we're sort of observing at the moment a lot of people who've been vegan stopping being vegan and feeling a lot better and coming out on their Instagram profiles about that. Ayurveda does say that we need animal protein every day for the thyroid. And that doesn't need to kill the animal. It could be a spoonful of yogurt, it could be a drizzle of ghee, it could be some paneer or fresh cheese from really well looked after animals, because the dairy industry is scary, and I really understand the ethical reasons of where vegans are coming from, and I really hear them and resonate with them. And our dairy industry is horrific, but if you can get raw unpasteurized milk or a little bit of fresh cheese from a local farm, this is the revolution we need to happen, is to be able to get better sources of vegetarian animal protein. I've got my own chickens, so I know those eggs are very happy eggs. It could be just an egg or here or there, but I do worry about depletion in vegans long term. There is no other traditional culture long term vegan in the world. You just got to look at what traditional cultures are still doing. They're cooking food and they're not vegan long term. They're vegetarian very happily. So yeah, it's a little bit of an unpopular answer, but I'm happy to.
Sorry, let's go back to your tips. I apologise. I did go off then.
I'm either of you two vegan. I should have asked that.
No, no, not at all. I'm a proper
Yeah,
like I
it's
eat
interesting what you were saying because I was vegetarian for many years, and I went to work with a well, he was not Ayurvedic. He was a Chinese medicine masseuse, and he did qigong and things. And he said to me, "I'm really sorry, you need to start eating meat. You're because my body was catabolic. It was during the same time as my periods were. I was flooding. I was just under a huge amount of stress, and well, there's a long story about me going to the butcher's in Italy, and it was a bit like an opera, and he was saying, "Madam, you don't know what you're doing," and I was like, "No, but I do," and it was all very ridiculous. Anyway, I left, long story short, with a piece of meat, and I was petrified about eating it, but I did eat it, and from that moment on, I have been eating meat. But I completely hear you. I mean, I don't eat meat when I'm in a restaurant unless I know the provenance. I'm very fussy about that. I only buy organic meat which comes from a butcher, so I know that the meat has been treated well. That I'm incredibly fussy about that. So
Yeah.
but I do eat meat. But I think I think it's very much everybody has to find their own path with it. I think if people feel that veganism is right for them, then that's fine. If they feel vegetarianism is, I think it's just part of our journey. But yes, anyway, the rest of your tips.
Yeah, and interesting, meat is seen as a good way, meat soup, not big chunks of steak, but meat is seen as a very good way to ground vata. So Chinese medicine is, not surprisingly, in agreement with Ayurveda on many things. That they're evolved from the same root. But so know your dosha, know what's best for you. And don't be buffeted around by what you read on Instagram or social media and magazines, and everyone needs to do this and all that. Just really know what's best for you and why. And then the second one is get back in tune with natural cycles. So I get up the hill, I walk up this hill every morning in front of me, and I get natural sunlight in my eye, because all cultures around the world, traditional cultures, they spend all morning outside in the daylight, and the afternoon they're lazing under the trees in the shade.
100%.
It's the morning daylight that resets our circadian cycles really well. So there's not much sunshine mostly in Somerset, but I do try and get morning light on me. And then I do try and get to bed by 10. It's not that sexy, and I'm 80-20. Yeah, I go to the old party, that's fun. But there was a recent study that came out last week showing there's a bit of a myth that we get a lot less sleep than our ancestors, and this study blew it open. They said, actually, no, our ancestors, even great grandparents got less sleep than us, but they were healthier because they were more in tune with their circadian cycle. So I suspect they were basically going to bed earlier because they didn't have Netflix playing the next series, and they were getting up earlier. So get in tune. Just think, what is my circadian rhythm? Don't have lie-ins at the weekend. That's really disruptive. Don't have day sleep. That's really disruptive, unless you're convalescing or pregnant and things like that. But I think that's the second tip, is just tune into your Google circadian research. Have a look at the latest. There's a brilliant book called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, which will really open your eyes to sleep being the single most affordable, democratic, free way we can all get better health. Apart from my postman night shift worker, it's quite hard for people who are working night shift. And the third tip is how we use the senses. So Ayurveda has these 3 pillars of health, which we've covered, which is diet, sleep, and then lastly is how we use our energy and senses. And a lot of people translate this brahmacharya as celibacy, but it's not, because Ayurveda was all about creating healthy children and recognizing the life stages. But this use of the senses isn't something people really think about every day. But Ayurveda thinks a lot about how we use our 5 senses. How do we look after the eyes, the ears, the taste, the smell? And how do we cause them to be out of balance? And I think you can both guess which devices are causing our senses to be out of balance. But for me, getting out into nature is a way to disconnect from digital, reconnect with nature, forage for some foods. So just think about, how are you caring for your senses? Because the senses each link to a dosha.
Yeah.
So the sight links with fire, the ears link with vata. So if we misuse our senses, that aggravates the dosha. It has a very deep impact on our physiology and our nervous system.
It's really interesting. It's really interesting. Guys, my tummy is starting to rumble.
Good. Mine too.
Some light bulb moments today, Jo. So thank you so much.
Me
I
too,
just
definitely.
really loved having you on this podcast. I think you've just opened my mind, and our listeners are just going to be blown away as well. And this needs to be talked about more, I'll be honest with you. And it sounds like you can go on for hours and hours, and it's like, wow, how it's like there's so much to learn. So thank you for your time, and yeah, I really appreciate it loads.
And Joe's
Great.
got a video. You have a video course, don't you, which is about the doshas as well.
Yeah, we got the Ayurveda Academy. So we got a 75-minute course, which is Know Your Dosha. So that's dipping your toe in, but really fun for friends and family. And there's a 3-month introduction to Ayurveda course, and that's 3 live webinars. So it's quite interactive with recorded content. And then we do a 6-month applying Ayurveda course, and then a 3-day face-to-face, because about 10% of our students get the bug and they want to become Ayurveda lifestyle providers, and they're insured and qualified, and they can, a lot of them are nutritional therapists or they're yoga teachers, but they want to become a lifestyle advisor, which is a nice qualification to add on if you're working in the health field already.
Fantastic. So we'll put the links.
Yeah, how it become really addictive. We'll put all your links in the podcast so everyone can access them. So please go have a look at the website, and please go and try the introduction, because I think it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And there's a little note to our guests who are listening. Please follow our podcast, because the more people that follow, then the more guests we can get on, and the more beautiful information we can share out there. A bit long-winded that was.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joe. It was a real pleasure.
Really, everyone has a lovely lunch.
Oh
yes.
I'm actually going to make some soup for later.
Some wild garlic. I'm going to go and forage for some wild garlic, I think.
Yeah, I've got that for supper. I've got chicken pie for lunch, so I'm really starving.
Bye. Lovely to meet you both.
Lovely to meet you too. Bye. Oh.